Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the it's a new time, our regular council meeting for the afternoon of Monday, January the 13th. Are there any late items?
There's none.
Thank you. Could I have somebody bring forward approval of the agenda? Councillor Holmes and Councillor Van Elfen, all in favor? Thank you. Now there is a 15-minute opportunity for public comment on any items that are on the agenda, so you can see on either of the monitors the items that are open for public commentary or comments. If you wish to speak, please come to the podium. You have 2 minutes. If you could keep your speaking notes to 2 minutes and introduce yourself with your name and address. Thank you. Tim, come on up.
Let me put my glasses on here so I can see what I'm doing. Good afternoon, Mayor Boot and Council. My name is Tim Dunn, and I'm on the Board of Directors of the Summerland Recreation Society, which operates the Lakeshore Rackets Club. First, I would like to thank Leslie for a report on planning for outdoor tennis, pickleball, and dog in park, and to the Council for their consideration of the findings. The Summerland Recreation Society already adheres to the community development objectives and planning principles that guided Leslie's report. The order of operations presented in the report are logical and reasonable. Our main concern is twofold. If the time frame for new tennis courts stretches out beyond 2 years, the project might not materialize. It could be outside the mandate of the council. Governments change, priorities change. Moreover, if the district is also considering large capital projects, it's better to settle relatively inexpensive courts beforehand. The second concern is that the burden for providing tennis in Summerland rests solely with a volunteer-driven, not-for-profit society, which simply does not have the financial and human resources to sustain our level of service to the community without a viable partner. The District of Summerland is the most obvious partner. We think that the time frame proposed in the report can be collapsed into 2 years, with partnership, geotech, and grant funding issues dealt with in phase 1, then proceed with construction in year 2. To start with, the LRC has free available space for new courts. Secondly, the province, with whom we have a license, approves a partnership with the district, especially if the arrangement enhances public access to the waterfront and promotes greater use of the LRC grounds. The province recently provided clarity on this issue. Thirdly, the district has existing joint use agreements in place to serve as precedents for partnerships. Specialized recreation activities are already met through community associations, including golf, ice, and field sports. To continue, the LRC serves citizens of all ages and makes its facility available to school students, visitors, newcomers, walkers, joggers, and is pet friendly. The LRC has a long record of maintaining its courts and offering organized programs. Since the LRC is aligned with district improvements for the waterfront, we have worked hard to make the foreshore very attractive, and public feedback has been very positive. The official community plan identifies lakeshore access as a priority. Last year, the district helped us upgrade the LRC parking lot in exchange for public use. This worked well for both parties, and we would like to build on this cooperative arrangement. Finally, council and staff committed to supporting high-quality recreation opportunities. The 2018 Parks and Recreation Master Plan identified tennis as a high priority item, and the current council indicated strong support for building 2 new quality courts. The LRC is excited to cooperate with the district. My question to council is how can we help expedite the building of one and perhaps 2 additional courts on the grounds of the Racket Center? Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
Okay.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak to an item on the agenda this afternoon? Please come to the podium.
Hi, do you want my name?
Name and address, please.
Jennifer Stark, 7815 Giants Head Road.
Please proceed.
I'm going to speak on this thing about the dog parks. I own 2 beagles, and I know that in this town there are a lot of people that have beagles and bassets and dachshunds, all scent hounds, and we cannot run them on the trails off-leash, and we can't run them off-leash in the off-leash parks without a fence. Now, there's quite a few of us there, but there's also elderly people that don't want to run their dogs off-leash because they're not able to catch them, and also disabled people. And forget the disabled dogs and the dogs that are deaf or the dogs that are old. I have been wondering, there's been a lot of talk about this back and forth, but I'm just wondering why we can't have a dog park equivalent to or better than the one in Oliver. Oliver has half the taxpayers that we do, half, and yet they have a beautiful dog park. So that is my question to council, is when are we going to get a realistic, good dog park with all the fences and the gates and everything in a proper place that's large enough to run your dog? Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Ms. Stark. Anyone else? Mr. Hacking? Oh, Mr. Thompson.
Good afternoon. Happy New Year. Grant Thompson, 14119 Prairie Valley Road. I also wanted to speak, as Tim did, about the pickleball, tennis, and dog park report. I want to thank council and staff for undertaking that report. It's a much-needed analysis and review of the situation here in town. There is one issue that I do take exception to in the report. It was some unfortunate wording in a couple of spots that seems to indicate the Lakeshore Racket Center is a private members club. That's not the case. Similar to how the pool and golf course operate, we take drop-ins. There is primarily membership, but a lot of drop-in people. But I also wanted to concur with Tim about the scheduling. I don't see any reason for stretching out new courts for a 3-year program. I think a 2-year is more than reasonable, especially if the discussions with the Lakeshore Racket Center and the geotechnical are conducted on the same timeline. Anyway, thanks for the report. It's much needed.
Thank you.
Morning, Council. Robert Hacking, 7720 Prairie Valley Road. I'm only speaking in relation to the dog park in the report here. Mayor and Council, thank you for making the creation of a safe, accessible, year-round, off-leash dog park a listed priority in the Parks Master Plan. I appreciate the work of the consultant to address the lack of dog amenities with this report. Many of the excellent recommendations already brought forward are reinforced in this report as well. Unfortunately, I believe it's important to point out to Council some aspects of the process that I feel have let dog owners down. First, when Council made a motion 3 years ago to include the Summerland Dog Owners Association recommendations in the process, I was very disappointed when many of the specific park suggestions were in fact not included by the consultant. Prior to the open house, when the consultant presented the parks to the Parks Committee, the original SDOA report was not even provided to the committee for context, nor were relevant stakeholders invited to be present to answer questions. I heard the committee spent all of about 5 minutes talking about dogs before moving on to the next agenda item. Second concern of mine is that staff provided specific direction to the consultant, restricting suggested park options from being part of the public engagement process. The reason offered was that the options may conflict with existing uses and should not be considered, never mind that nearly all the suggestions that have been provided do have existing use conflicts of some sort, just not with certain user groups. The public were permitted to see and comment only on a narrow and staff-defined scope of options, and without being provided important context, such as cost estimates or challenges with rezoning those options. As such, the final recommendations of the park and their designs should be considered opinions of the consultant and district staff and not the result of meaningful public input. That said, I'm glad we're here and that this report has in it long overdue recommendations that I can support. While I do not recommend proceeding with any particular park location without further consideration of options and a best layout, this is a step forward, and I hope Council will show some leadership and vision on this issue. Summerland dog owners are not looking for a destination-class dog park on the fringes of the community, and our needs do not require $3,000 garbage cans and expensive water fountains. We desire to get value for our tax dollars and expect decisions that serve our needs effectively and do so within our means. Last year, Lake Country opened 2 safe, accessible off-leash dog parks, totaling 6 acres for its residents. Summerland has yet to build its first.
Thank you, Mr. Hacking. Is there anyone else that would care to comment on one of the items on the agenda? All right. So we will proceed on to item 5, business items, beginning with the draft Community Energy and Emissions Reduction Plan Priority Actions Review. I will turn it over to you, Tammy, to introduce your cohorts in this presentation.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council. Happy New Year. As requested by Council at the November 25th committee meeting, we are here today to talk specifically about the priority actions outlined in the draft Community Energy and Emissions Reduction Plan. At the November 25th meeting, Council was presented with a broader overview of the plan, its background, and the planned reduction in emissions resulting from the plan. But Council wanted a deeper dive into these items, and that's what we're here today to do. So I'm joined today by Peter Robinson from the Community Energy Association, who is the lead consultant that has been working with us. And we also have a couple of staff members, Angelique Wood, our Community Development Coordinator, and Corinne Gain, our Director of Development Services, here to speak to some of the items that will impact their work plans. I just want to quickly note for Council that since our November 25th meeting, we did have an open house on the draft plan on December 4th. That was very well attended, and we received excellent feedback about the draft plan and the priority items. We've also received some feedback from the Simon Fraser University group that we're working with, and both of the comments from the open house and that group will be incorporated into the final plan, but none of the action items here that we're going to be discussing today were affected by either of those. Finally, I just want to say that the intention of this plan, or to reiterate that the intention of this plan is really to fit within existing plans, existing priorities of Council, including our official community plan, the recently passed trail, cycling, and sidewalk master plans, our upcoming electrical energy strategy, and so on. So the intention here is to go forward with things that we're already starting to work on or already have envisioned, and just to reiterate that support from Council for these items. As we mentioned last time, budgeting for these items will come forward through our regular budgeting process, but we do have some high-level information about expected costs to share with you today. So we know there's a very packed agenda, and I'm going to move pretty quickly through the items, but of course we'll have an opportunity for comments and discussion as we go. So I'll just invite Peter up to the podium. And we're going to get started if you're looking at your PDFs of the plan on page 35, and that's table 5 that outlines the high priority items. So the first item here is under the category of new buildings, and that is the implementing the BC Energy Step Code, and we have a suite of actions here. And the first item there is in the immediate 0 to 2 year timing. And this is to educate our building and development community about the STEP code to make sure that everybody feels comfortable with the upcoming changes that are going to be mandated by the province. The outcome here is to continue that education until we feel that everybody's on the same page and that everyone feels comfortable with the upcoming changes. The costs here are expected to be minimal and will depend on what we're able to collaborate with other communities and organizations like Fortis BC on, who also have grants and other programs that we can basically piggyback onto.
And effort is expected to be minimal as well, but greenhouse gas impacts and economic impacts, as you see, are expected to, on their own, be minimal as well, but it's part of a much bigger picture in terms of helping to actually move to the real meat of it, which is actually the next action.
And so the next piece here is to actually move forward with referencing the STEP code in our building bylaw. And we have put forward a draft of that for council's consideration, as you know, but that's gone back to the upcoming committee that I think we're going to be talking about later in the agenda a little bit, and the council is well aware of. So referencing the BC STEP code and moving forward with that is something that council's already previously given us direction to do. And so this action is really just to make sure that that moves forward and it's captured as part of our plan. Costs here are quite minimal, as it's pretty simple to put it into the building bylaw. There's no capital or otherwise operational costs associated.
Yeah, so essentially, we're actually assuming zero cost for that particular action. Effort, there's already been quite a lot of effort by Corey Gain on this action already, and probably not a large amount going forward. And greenhouse gas impacts and economic impacts in particular are expected to be quite considerable, as you can see there.
Then the last piece of the STEP code. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Could we ask questions as we go along with each one?
What would you prefer?
In the interest of time, if it's specific to the action, of course we can take it, but if there are general questions, maybe we can hold them to the end, but we can give it a try.
Okay.
All my questions are specific to specific actions.
As you wish.
So for this one thing we've discussed quite a bit in the past is about having the building inspectors to be able to inspect buildings that are built to the full STEP code. I'm just wondering if we need something in there specifically acknowledging that's a challenge and that we can actually make some sort of, I don't know what we can do, but we need to ensure that we have building inspectors who can work to what we envision.
Councillor Holmes, could I ask you to use your microphone,
sorry.
please? Thank you. And remember that this is being recorded, so it's extra important.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you.
Still learning.
So I guess, thank you for that question, Councillor. What I would say is we can absolutely make notes in the plan with specific items if council feels that that's important. The plan, however, is intended to be a little bit more high-level philosophical, and then once the plan's passed and staff is tasked with implementing the plan, then we can come back with some more detailed how we will achieve this, proposals for council to consider, and identify more specific challenges and opportunities coming out of each of the actions. But if council wishes to have that noted, I'm sure that's an easy edit to make.
I guess it would fall under the investigate the barriers.
Anyone else on council care to comment on this first item? No? Okay, thank you. You're good, Councillor Holmes?
Yeah, thanks.
On this item?
Yeah.
Okay.
So then moving on to item C under the STEP code suite is the implementing fee rebates to encourage improved energy performance. And this is something that several other communities do in a variety of ways. And so here we're looking to investigate that and to come up with a fee rebate structure to encourage that energy performance. The costs here, oh, sorry, yes, thank you. Got too many screens happening here. Thanks. So the costs here, we have highlighted them in red to say that they could potentially be quite high, but some other communities, and maybe Peter can speak to that, have also put caps on how many rebates they'll offer in a given fiscal year. And again, that's something that staff would come back to council on a budgetary basis to sort of discuss in more detail. But in principle, the plan here is to implement some type of fee rebate structure.
So the District of Invermere, for example, it caps their annual rebates, I think, at about $2,000. The City of Campbell River, they cap their fee rebates, I think it's about $25,000, and it's kind of on an ongoing annual basis. And For the City of Campbell River, they fund it entirely through their Climate Action Reserve Fund, so through existing funds already allocated to climate action, which, of course, the District of Summerland already has similar funding structures as well. The effort, as you can see, is pretty light in terms of effort. We're expecting kind of a medium kind of effort, but in terms of the implementation, lots of other examples to rob and replicate from other communities, many. And the greenhouse gas impacts and the economic impacts, not as good as the previous action, but it's kind of part of a package in terms of just kind of helping to move the building industry forward in terms of building more efficient buildings.
So the next action under the new buildings suite is to implement a development permit area to enhance energy performance. So similar to other DPAs that the district already has, to look at including one that we could use to enhance things like water efficient landscaping or other energy efficiency measures. So this is something that we would consider and again bring back to council for more detailed consideration in the future. And the costs associated with this are expected to be quite minimal.
Yeah, probably pretty much zero, actually. But effort is medium. There are examples from other communities to replicate. But the greenhouse gas impacts, the economic impacts, I mainly assume this is going to be around improving water efficient landscaping, but perhaps having some benefits around orientation of buildings. But it's all part of like the bigger picture that helps. Yeah.
So then we're moving on to existing buildings, which we know are one of the major pieces of our greenhouse gas emissions footprint. And here we're looking to continue work that's already happening in terms of promoting existing programs around natural gas, electricity, and other energy efficiency programs. So our Community Climate Action Advisory Committee has already been doing a lot of work on this, and so this action is really just to give direction to continue that work and to roll this out on an ongoing basis. The costs associated with this, again, will be quite minimal, mostly for brochures and workshops, and could generally fit into existing operational budgets.
And effort, by working, in particular by working with community partners, such as the Climate Action Committee, effort can be minimal. Now, this is one of the actions which you can kind of do, and a number of actions like this, you can do as little or more as you like. But yeah, the effort can be minimal, the costs can be minimal, but the greenhouse gas impacts and the economic impacts in particular can be extremely large. There can also be an excellent social equity piece to this as well, because it can help to reduce the energy bills of some of the most vulnerable people in the community.
Moving on, there's another recommendation here, or action, to remove the current existing rate increase for electric heat, which is in our fees and charges bylaw. So this is something that isn't necessarily widely applied at this time. However, it is in the bylaw, and so it does create a potential barrier if we were to move forward with this in a more meaningful way. So the suggestion here is to remove that from the bylaw and take away that increase for people who choose to heat their home using electric heat.
So the effort should be minimal. I mean, this is one of the ones which is kind of difficult to say, but effort should be minimal. And the greenhouse gas and economic impacts, again, difficult to calculate, a lot of variables in here. But I made some assumptions around what the impacts could be, and so if it leads to more electric heating instead of natural gas, then they can be quite considerable, actually. So it's good to know.
So moving into the more medium-term horizon around the existing buildings in that sort of 3 to 4 year range, we're looking to work closely with realtors to help educate them about energy efficiency and renewable energy. And this is something that lots of communities across the province are trying to do in coalition with what they're working on with Step Code, and looking at how we can get those other people out in the community working with consumers more aware of these items as they're shopping for new homes or thinking about moving, things like that.
And again, costs can be very minimal with this particular action. They can also be larger if you wish. There can be lots of potential for working with community partners, Fortis BC being an excellent and obvious candidate, and they can also provide funding towards something like this. Effort can be low, but the greenhouse gas and economic impact, provided the education is successful, can be substantial as well. And again, this can tie in also obviously with the Step Code action and the previous action on promoting the utility incentive programs to existing buildings.
Excuse me, Tammy, could I ask a question on this particular one? I'm wondering, and I know that it doesn't specifically relate to Well, I guess it does to a small degree. I was going to say to electrical use or energy use. I'm wondering if part of this education and working with the realtors will include looking, as you mentioned earlier, about water efficient landscaping as well, as people are purchasing homes, because the efficiency extends beyond just the electrical use.
Absolutely. I think it's something that we can include wording around to make sure that it's captured there. It's definitely the intention, but it's a good piece of feedback just to make sure it doesn't get lost. Absolutely.
Okay. I know that Corey has, as it was distributed by the Okanagan Basin Water Board and their partners, an excellent guide on that particular topic. And I'm sure you've seen that as well, Ms. Hawthorne. Thank you very much.
So moving along into that sort of 5+ year horizon, we have a couple of items. One, hosting a climate change program for business. Now, we know that businesses are an important part of our work to reduce climate change, but there's so many programs that are sort of targeted for them, and we feel like we know that residential energy costs are something that we feel, and we heard from our stakeholder engagement, is a big priority. But we didn't want to leave businesses out. So we have an action item in the 5+ year horizon to work more closely with them about how businesses can reduce their own emissions and how we can also use green tourism as something to benefit those businesses in our community. Like many of the other actions, this could, have a medium cost depending on the scope that we choose to take. But it's something that we can decide as we move forward and look for those partners to help us with this item.
And again, effort could be, we've put in that effort might be considerable, and that is being conservative because, again, there's the possibility of working with community partners. The Thompson Okanagan Tourism Association, for example, has had a green tourism program, and if the action were to be, say, as simple as just inviting them to the community and giving them a bit of a local push, then it could be a very easy action, but we're being conservative in terms of our estimate of effort there. And then greenhouse gas impacts and economic impacts, difficult to guess what those might be, but we have to kind of do our best in terms of making an assumption around what the impacts can be. And we do have some examples of for example, business programs in Prince George that we can sort of extrapolate from. Yeah.
We've also captured here converting our decorative streetlights to LED. As council knows, we went through a process to convert our what are called Cobra Head streetlights, and this is to finish off that project. Now, however, at this time, it's a very expensive endeavor. Our last estimate was $600,000 to convert 400 lights. And so we said, thank you, but not right now. We'll sort of put that on the back burner and wait for technology to come along. So this is in that 5+ year horizon as we look to wait for new technology, but just to make sure that we've captured it so that it doesn't get lost as we move forward.
And if the effort is as simple as kind of moving ahead with, selecting a proposal, then it may not be too difficult for staff. Because electricity is such a low greenhouse gas footprint, then the greenhouse gas impacts might be very low to this action.
So then we're moving into the renewable energy actions, and starting with the more immediate one, which is offering an investment opportunity into our solar and storage project. So this is something we've heard a lot of community support for, and so this action would be to have us take a look at what that possibilities could, how that could form. Would we do something like the City of Nelson or New Westminster, or maybe look to some of the American examples, and then come back to council with a proposal about what that opportunity might look like. One note here is we did put the costs as being potentially high. However, the intention with these programs in other communities has been to be either revenue neutral or actually to have a little bit of revenue for the utility to come out of the project. So without knowing council's direction on that, we did put a high cost, but it again could be revenue neutral or positive for the community.
Yeah, in discussion with Tammy, we might well be changing this one to orange or green for the costs. And the effort can be considerable, but there can be good community benefits that arise from such an action, including just this community can have a real sense of participating in something local, just as, for example, we've seen in Nelson when they've done exactly this kind of thing. The economic impacts could be quite substantial for for the community, which is great. The greenhouse gas impacts you'll see are very low, but again, that's because the electricity purchased from Fortis already, is produced by hydroelectricity, and so has a very low greenhouse gas footprint.
Councillor Holmes?
Yeah, thank you. I understand how this might be popular, but I personally have quite a few concerns about this whole initiative. I think it would take up quite a bit of staff time for what might be a pretty low impact project, and I think it could even end up undermining our own electricity utility, and keeping in mind that we only have so much land to put around, and if it's such a great idea, then maybe it'd be something a private company might want to undertake. There's just so many red flags there for me that I really, am kind of worried about it, and ultimately I think it could dissuade the use of installing solar on rooftops, where I think that's where residential solar ought to go, is people put it on their roofs, and it would be more, to me, be more useful concentrating our efforts on your next slide, or your next one there. So.
Thanks for that comment. I'm not disagreeing or trying to say that your concerns aren't justified in any way. I'll just make note that the other two communities who have done a project like this also own their own electric utility, and they've had quite positive results and haven't seen, we don't understand there to be any sort of undermining of their revenue sources or whatnot. And the intention here typically has been for residents who are unable to install solar on their own property, perhaps because they don't have the appropriate rooftop space or shading or something like that, so that no matter who you are in the community, you can share in the benefits of solar, even if you don't have the rooftop to put it on. So just some experiences and some rationale that's come from other communities, but of course we're different, and we always want to look at what's best for our own community, so I'll just put that there. So the next item here proposed is to encourage non-residential solar installations. And we did put this in sort of the medium term. As council knows, our new net metering program is exclusively for residential customers at this time. And so we wanted to, and we heard strong support for putting a program in place for businesses or other non-residential customers like churches or not-for-profits that own their own buildings. So we wanted to capture this here in the medium to long term, once we've had a chance to do more assessment around the residential net metering program and its impacts on the utility.
Great. And effort, again, can be medium. Greenhouse gas impacts, again, low for reasons that I've already stated, and economic impacts could be considerable. They can actually be extremely high. The economic impacts, it might be worth mentioning that the economic impacts in all of these cases are strictly in terms of the reduction in energy costs, and that's how they're assumed. But if you take into account, for example, that you have solar installation companies within the community who could benefit from this business, and from then the economic impacts could actually be much more substantial. And that's actually the case with a lot of these different actions, that these economic impacts are very conservatively stated. So for example, having a more complete compact community and your savings in life cycle infrastructure costs, or the potential savings from that, could far outweigh any potential energy savings. But it's just very difficult to calculate, especially at this point in time.
So on that note, we're moving into the land use section and the items there. And the first one is around that life cycle infrastructure costing. And so this is something that we feel can be brought forward in the short term to apply a tool to major land use planning decisions. There's a nationally recognized tool that's available that lots of communities use to help understand how development proposals impact our assets. And so we feel that this would dovetail really nicely with the asset management strategy that has been recently passed. The costs for using the tool are quite low. However, you'll see that the effort there we've put in red because it could use quite a bit of staff time to step through it, especially as we start learning to use the tool and taking the time to get it into our usual business processes.
It takes time, for example, to put in all your different infrastructure costs and so on for in different situations into the tool. But the greenhouse gas, because as it leads over time to a more compact community, more complete compact community, the greenhouse gas impacts and the economic impacts, basically through reductions in transportation and fuel costs primarily, can be quite considerable. It can really be a very powerful action. Part of this action, you can think of it as just kind of having more of the information that you need to sort of make the decisions you make around planning decisions for the community.
So also under the land use set of actions in the medium term is looking at variable development cost charges to promote growth in the downtown area. We know that we already have some work to do around DCCs, and so that's why we've put this into the medium term. And this is something that, again, lots of other communities utilize, and so we would be looking to come back to council with a more detailed proposal about how this could look in Summerland.
And the effort, cost, greenhouse gas impacts, economic, basically exactly what I said for the previous action. Yeah.
Councillor Holmes, and then I have a question as well.
I understand the principle, but the fact is, in Summerland, it's our downtown that needs major infrastructure upgrades, whereas it's the outlining area where the infrastructure isn't too bad. So it kind of, the effect could be to encourage sprawl rather than discourage it.
Well, yeah, the whole intention of the action would be to try to discourage sprawl, and so, I mean, I suppose you could say perhaps the infrastructure in the downtown does need to be replaced anyway, but putting in new infrastructure into outlying areas, then that would just provide like an asset that will then need to be replaced at some point again into the future. And the greater those distances, because it's the same number of people, it's the same tax base, the greater the distances, then the more in the long term that's going to cost.
Did you have a follow-up question to that?
Yeah, well, I guess it'll come to council and we'll discuss it when we discuss the DCCs, but I still have a hard time understanding, I mean, knowing that we need to upgrade our infrastructure downtown, I don't know if giving a break on DCCs is going to make a difference, I think, in that respect. Anyway, we'll discuss that.
Yes, yeah. My question was actually, if we could go back to land use 1 for a moment. Peter, you mentioned that the effort is in red because it would take a considerable amount of staff time, especially as they're learning the tool, how to use the tool, and also putting the information in the tool to get best use out of it. You want to have the best going in, so you get the best coming out. I'm wondering if, because of all of the work, and I'm not sure if you can answer this question, it might be for Tammy, I'm wondering if the work that has already gone into the asset management tool and the inventory and that kind of thing, if there is a way to reduce those costs, because a lot of that inventory and that kind of data, and I'm not sure, which might be able to be used in this tool, is already there, and it'd be just a matter, it would be a matter of transferring it from one area to another, or copying it, I guess. Would that reduce the costs? Like I said, I have no idea how this tool would work.
It's possible. I'm afraid I don't have a good answer for you on that because I don't know what information is in that asset management work you've already done, and also I do have some sense of the data that's needed for the tool, but I haven't worked directly with the tool myself.
Okay.
So it would seem reasonable to expect that it would help.
Okay.
I would say that it sets us up really well to be able to use the tool, where some other communities who might not have done that asset management work might have a higher initial effort required. The other piece is, because it dovetails so nicely into the asset management, there may be grants available to help us with some of that work.
Good. Councillor Barkwell.
Yeah. I'm glad you went back to this one, Your Worship. I was having trouble thinking, like, if it requires a lot of effort, if there's value there, because it's quite simple to say and to know and understand in your head, compact is good, sprawl is bad. So you just, try and work towards your planning and zoning and such to have a more compact, denser downtown, recognizing, of course, that there's other competing priorities such as preservation of agricultural land. What's the value in this?
Well, so there can be nuances that that can crop up. So, for example, it can also be to do with the value of the property as well. So that can have an implication. So, for example, some work that was done in West Vancouver, they found that some of their extremely expensive neighborhoods, that even though the infrastructure cost might be quite high, because the property values are so high as well, that actually from that, from the tax perspective, it actually kind of worked out, which is not the answer that you necessarily want to get from an environmental perspective, but from a financial, from a fiscal perspective, it's interesting to see that. So also, it can provide you with the information that you sometimes need in order to make tough decisions. So, for example, City of Calgary were, I think in many ways, the pioneers of this work, which is interesting. And so when the first study was brought out in Calgary, that if you continue developing in this way, then this is what your infrastructure costs are going to be, capital not operating. And if you instead develop in a much more complete, compact kind of way, then your infrastructure, capital and operating costs will be much lower. And that led to apparently a substantial amount of conflict within stakeholders in and around the community. Because, for example, a number of people had bought land on the outskirts of the community expecting that the city would just continue to grow. And so they lobbied against this, but other people who were interested in lower taxes, which of course was a large number of people, were very interested in pursuing that work and finding out more about it. So it just gave them the information they needed to kind of make tough decisions. So a couple of reasons there.
Okay.
All right, so we'll keep moving along here. Next section is transportation, and the first action proposed here is to raise awareness of ride-sharing and guaranteed ride-home programs. So just a little bit of detail in terms of the types of things that we'd like to educate our community on. We already do promote services like carpool.ca, but this would just give further direction to continue doing so. So minimal costs associated with that action.
And effort could be, again, this is one of those ones which is a little bit like how long is a piece of string, so it could be minimal effort. We put it in orange, that potentially stepping up current activities a little bit. Greenhouse gas impacts and economic impacts can be quite nice as well.
So the next action is another suite similar to step code where it has a few sub-actions, and that's implementing this series of actions regarding electric vehicles. So the first is raising awareness through events to help our community understand EVs and promote them. We've already started doing some of this, and we've also made sure to include e-bikes and e-scooters as part of that electric transportation effort.
As a sort of a general comment just on all of the electric vehicle actions here, so it can really be one of your biggest greenhouse gas savers and one of your biggest economic savers as well, because electric vehicles are so much more efficient, about 5 times more efficient than internal combustion engine vehicles, can really be very beneficial for the community as a whole. Also, all of the actions within here are kind of part of a package in terms of moving forward with this and the considerable benefits, even air quality benefits as well it can bring for the community, so good health benefits there. So yeah, on the events to raise awareness and understanding, so perhaps medium effort, there can be possibility of working with partners again. First Things First Okanagan, for example, have run electric vehicle events in other parts of Okanagan. And simply by raising awareness, having test drives for people so people are aware of what electric vehicles are like, what they like to drive, can help to reduce barriers and could potentially lead to considerable savings.
The next action here, council's already started taking action on this, is to look for opportunities to expand our electric vehicle charging station options. So, as council knows, we've applied for funding to expand our network greatly, and we're hoping for an announcement about that funding sometime early this year. So, everyone keep their collective fingers crossed for us. So, depending on the results of funding applications, the costs for this could be quite high. However, this could also have a lot of economic impacts for us, and if we are able to secure grant funding, then the costs would be relatively low.
And effort could be, well, even writing grant applications, as staff are very well aware, even writing grant applications can be quite time consuming, but obviously can pay off, sometimes quite considerably. So that's part of the reason that the effort can be high, but also there's a lot of work in terms of kind of managing installations and there's a lot of work that goes in behind the installations and putting those in. The greenhouse gas impacts, the economic impacts, again, can be really quite considerable for this action, I'm very happy to say.
So the next is making sure that we're promoting our existing bylaw around low-speed electric vehicles and educating our community that we already do allow these vehicles and making sure that people are aware of that. So low costs associated with that, and
but potentially considerable effort. I mean, this effort we could change or may consider changing it, perhaps making it orange, because it can be, again, it's, how much do you want to do on this? But the greenhouse gas impacts and economic impacts, again, can be quite considerable. There's a nice tie-in as well with, in terms of aging in place, and just helping to ensure that, people can feel like they can, for example, Qualicum Beach is a good example of a community that's done something like this. Yeah.
So the next one here is protecting EV owners from higher electricity prices, and this was at a time before council made the decision to blend the Tier 1 and Tier 2 rates, so we need to redo some work on this action. However, I'll just note for council that at the last meeting of the Community Climate Action Advisory Committee, that committee did pass a resolution to recommend to council to utilize our electric rates to promote items like electric vehicles, heat pumps, and other energy efficiency measures. And so staff will be bringing that resolution forward for council's consideration in a more formal way in the near future. But this item did get strong support at our public engagement sessions as well as through our committee. So there's more work to be done here in revamping this action in light of the changes to our Tier 1 and 2 structure. But generally speaking, I think the action would remain the same to come up with some recommendations for council about how we could utilize our electric utility rates to promote EV owners to move forward with purchasing electric vehicles and using them in our community.
And I just made some assumptions around the impact this action could have by not discouraging people from getting electric cars. Yeah.
So then in the medium term, as we see more EVs coming out and the province moves forward with their Clean BC program, there's an action item here to expand EV parking requirements for new construction. There's already some pieces of our development bylaws that speak to this, but looking to expand on that in the medium future. So costs would be minimal in terms of getting that into the actual bylaw itself.
But potentially quite a lot of effort. Of course, there would need to be consultation, with the building and development industry that would need to happen, for example. Might take quite a lot of time, a lot of going back and forth. But the greenhouse gas impacts and the economic impacts could be considerable as well. Most charging from electric vehicle owners is done at home. Most people tend to just charge their vehicles at home, and then they leave home always, kind of with a full tank, as it were.
So the next action item here is an anti-idling campaign and or bylaw. We already have a corporate policy, an anti-idling corporate policy for our own fleet vehicles, but to roll something out in a broader way across the community. And again, this is one that had really strong support at our public engagement sessions.
Yeah, effort could be medium though, but the greenhouse gas impacts and the economic impacts, I'm always often surprised when I start to crunch the numbers on this, because they can be quite considerable, because a lot of emissions are created by idling. And so if it is possible to reduce these with a successful campaign or bylaw, then it can be a really good action to do.
So the next is another suite of actions around active and assisted transportation. And these ones really, we tried really carefully to look at existing plans, as I mentioned, like the Parks and Rec Master Plan, the trails, sidewalks, and the third one. Cycling, thank you. Too many plans. To make sure that we were enhancing those existing plans rather than adding to them. So improving active and assisted transportation infrastructure, encouraging bikes, e-bikes, perhaps through a sharing program, are the first two there. And both of those, again, depending on how far we go and in what way we decide to encourage those programs or improve that infrastructure, could have medium to high costs, but the impacts there are pretty considerable in terms of their reductions.
Yeah, and you can see those impacts there, but perhaps it's also worth just mentioning that kind of the co-benefits in terms of community health, and just making sure that we have a community for everyone so that anyone can kind of get around, whether you're 8 years old or 80 years old. So.
And the last item here is another long-term 5+ year action to look at public transit for special events, such as we've already started working a little bit on this around Light Up and bringing in a shuttle service. So expanding things like that in our community to help people to carpool for special events and improve the safety and accessibility to our special events.
Absolutely. Now, I see there's a question.
Oh, Councillor Holmes.
Yeah, just regarding public transit, I guess I would have expected a bit more about public transit in this overall plan. When we know, what an impact if we get more people taking public transit could be, and so if we're having, I guess, programs to raise awareness of ride sharing and electric vehicles or something, what about raising awareness of the use of public transit? I've talked before about, let's just make it free riding around Summerland, and as an example, that could raise awareness of public transit. But I also think we need to, have some sort of philosophical discussion of where do we want to see public transit go? Do we want to expand local service, having a bus at least in the summer down to the lakeshore? Do we envision expanding our services to Penticton and the new route to Kelowna? Maybe we know the challenges the school district is having with school busing. So maybe we could, maybe there's an opportunity to provide work with public transit to provide that school busing thing. I think there's so much with public transit we should be talking about and looking at that. And the impact is going to be for emissions. It's huge, potentially. So I guess I'd like to see more about public transit in this plan.
Tam, do you want to speak to? I'll speak. Okay. So we had more actions on public transit in a kind of earlier draft, but basically we just didn't want to sort of include too much that the district was already working on. And is already covered in some other plans already. But yes, the impact can really be considerable, absolutely. So this particular action here, T5, is a new action that I understand is not included in those existing transportation plans already.
Councillor Barkwell?
No, thank you. Considering that, reducing auto emissions is probably one of the largest ways we can save
Yes.
greenhouse gas, I was wondering how much of a, and these savings are measured in tons of carbon dioxide.
Yeah.
One trip to Penticton and back, say 40 kilometers with an average car that gets, say, 40 miles a gallon or something. How many tons of greenhouse gas, or how many trips for 1 ton? How can we relate that to our daily lives?
I'm going to have to get back to you on that one. Do you happen to know off the top of your head?
Well, I think it depends a lot on the type of vehicle that you're driving and how many people you have in the vehicle. There's lots of ways to slice that, but we can, the province provides guidance in terms of emissions per liter. So, and that's something that I can easily get you some answers on in
Well-
terms of the liter.
Yeah, it's very easy. In fact, it would take me about 2 minutes actually just to find the number. But I know we're on a time crunch here, so. But I have data for the District of Summerland on the number of vehicles that you have, like estimates. So the number of vehicles you have, the emissions per vehicle, and so I can very easily get a number for you on what the emissions, say average emissions for a District of Summerland vehicle per year, and also from that kind of back calculate and figure out, say, per trip to Penticton.
So those are the numbers you use for your estimates, then, the Summerland averages, not, because you have, like you said, there's assumptions, how many in a car, how big a
Oh,
car
yes.
or truck, or,
Oh yeah, absolutely.
we have a lot of farm vehicles, they're not so
Yeah.
great.
So the transportation emissions data is, we actually used a different methodology for that. So we used the sales from gas stations in the community, which is similar to what we did with the Kelowna plant, for example, or Prince George and so on, and Vernon. But anyway, we did cross-check that with the estimates that the province created from number of vehicles and efficiency per kilometre per vehicle. So.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Barquil, could I just ask you to use your mic?
Yes.
And, just going back to Councillor Holmes, your comment about transit, that's exactly what we're here to talk about with council. So if council were to give staff direction to increase the focus on transit through the plan, that's something that we could definitely take away and work on for the final draft that would come back for council's consideration for adoption. So that's exactly what we're here to hear. Is there anything missing from this that you feel is critical that we need to include?
Councillor Barquil?
Yeah, I'd like to add my support to Councillor Holmes' suggestion on that particular aspect. A free month or two to raise awareness on public transit and such might have multi-purpose. It might help us on our greenhouse gas goals and overall reduce costs as more people use the bus because they become more aware and more used to it. Thinking like that, it's good.
Let's remember to include something along those lines in the resolution then. Okay.
So perhaps our community development coordinator can also speak to some of the upcoming activities around transit.
I just wanted to mention while we're talking transit that we do have BC Transit coming in the first quarter to deal with an engagement strategy, specifically because council has already decided last year that it will be adding service hours to this year. But my instruction to BC Transit was I didn't want to work with 2014 assumptions that were made during the Transit Futures Plan, and I wanted to look at, since Greyhound was no longer happening, and since we had other changes happen in the community, I felt it really necessary for our existing community and existing council to be able to decide whether the service hours make sense during the daytime, during the evenings, during the weekends, and that's specific to our service in town and going to Penticton. So there will be other things to talk about during that engagement, but I think that this is a good thing that we're having this conversation now to be able to drive some of the questions we're asking BC Transit to be asking of our public.
Good. Thank you.
Great, so moving right along, so the next section is around climate adaptation, which, as we know, is an important piece of the whole climate action perspective on things, is to think about how the climate is changing and what we can do to adapt to those changes that we have no control over. So we have an action here to consider managing development in locations that will be affected by climate change, perhaps in a different way. So we already have DPAs related to and guidelines related to wildfires and steep slopes, but looking at other things like floodplains and other climate-specific risks to our development areas, and perhaps doing a refresh on some of the existing DPAs or taking another look at them with the most current science around climate change projections in mind.
Absolutely. So efforts, given that you already have existing DPAs, and, we're probably looking at perhaps one more DPA. So the efforts, we've have that in orange, as you can see, kind of a medium kind of effort. Costs, there's basically no actual cost to the district apart from the staff time. The greenhouse gas impacts, there's all the adaptation actions. They're not actually going to reduce greenhouse gases on their own. They're more about kind of reducing our vulnerability to a changing climate. But the economic impacts, I've put that in green just because there should be less risk to public infrastructure as a result of following through on this action, because obviously as development goes in, then there's public assets as well. And those could be, we want to just make sure those are not at risk.
And the next action here is to get a better sense of what those risks are. So we've already talked previously about creating a sort of complementary or sister document to this to do assessment about the risks to our community from climate change, and perhaps updating an existing plan, our hazard risk and vulnerability assessment that's part of our emergency management plan. And so that's something that we're working with the funder who provided funding for this plan, FCM, to see if they're willing to allow us to do under the current funding envelope. So the costs there we've put in orange just in case we're not able to massage that. But however, we do expect that they'd be open to it.
And efforts,
No,
sorry.
go ahead. I'll ask my question in a moment.
Okay. So efforts, just, as staff know, managing the creation of a plan can be quite a very time-consuming process from a staff perspective, so put the effort in red there. Again, greenhouse gas, they're basically, it won't save greenhouse gases, but again, the economic impacts could be extremely good for the community, by reducing those, the vulnerability to a changing climate.
Thank you. My question, and again, I'm sorry, I'm going backwards a little bit, to A1, about restricting development locations, etc. Last year, First Things First Okanagan brought in Robert Gray, who's a fairly well-known fire ecologist and speaks a lot about fire, and how the changing climate is impacting wildland fires. And I'm pleased to see that there is, and I know that this exists through our Development Services Department, fire management plans for subdivisions or areas that are being built out that are part of the interface or in the interface area. One thing that Mr. Gray talked about, or maybe he's Dr. Gray, spoke about was although these fire management plans are a good start to have as part of a development permitting process, I guess it is. Is that right? Yeah, Corey, thank you. That if you look at the down the road costs with either fire, I guess especially reducing fire mitigation, so reducing the chance that there will be a wildland fire in these interface areas, that the fire management plans don't take into effect, or don't take into account the costs down the road of not only privately owned infrastructure, homes, for example, but also public infrastructure in keeping the wildland fires at bay. Is that something that might be part of the development process discussions that are upcoming, or is it some kind of out of the realm of local government? It's kind of a big question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, that is a very big question. I think what you're demonstrating is the need to tie all of the various pieces together. So we're talking about asset management and our natural resources being part of our asset management plan, and there are costs and benefits associated with those over the long term. So while interface development permit area will have fire mitigation work done at the outset, it does not at this point take into consideration the full life cycle costs, which again takes you back to the asset management. So you start to see how all the pieces fit together.
Thank you.
So the last proposed action under the adaptation category is to help our community prepare for extreme heat events. And this action has an outcome of essentially going away, doing more work on figuring out how that could look, what that would look like, and coming back for council's consideration. Interior Health is working on a pilot around this that we feel we would be a good partner for, so reaching out to them. But there's other opportunities for us and things that we can, actions that may come out of that risk and vulnerability assessment that also might form part of this. So just basically asking for council's direction to identify this as a need for our community to consider preparing for extreme heat events and moving forward with some specific how type action items coming out of that.
Could we just hear from Peter first to get the rest of the comments? Thank you.
And I've been kind of conservative here because I'm not entirely sure, how much, help you might get from Interior Health in terms of moving forward. And there might be help also from other partners as well, as, summers get hotter and as we get, more extreme heat events and hotter nights and all that kind of thing. But, I've put in the effort as being, potentially quite a lot of effort. And, the economic impacts but it's not actually going to have, the reason greenhouse gas impacts, the economic impacts are red there. It's not that they're going to be negative. It's just to say that, it's not actually going to have a benefit. This is more kind of like a social action in terms of helping, the most vulnerable people within the community. Could be, elderly people that don't have access to air conditioning, for example. So,
Councillor Traynor.
I'm not sure if this fits into this part. And I realize that this is a specific pilot that Interior Health is offering, but is there anywhere in here where we would have some kind of program to do with wildfires and smoke and air quality? Like, I know they put out advisories, but is there any way that we can incorporate that into this area somehow and, helping people cope with really poor air quality? Because I think that's going to be a huge, I almost see that as being just as big as an extreme heat event. We get smoke pretty bad, when there are fires, so.
That is an excellent point. Through your worship to council. And so just, for example, was it summer of 2018, I think it was. With Prince George and the fires there. And, a lot of people, apparently the art gallery had the best air quality in town. As that was one of the ways they managed to get more people in the door at the art gallery. But I'll have a discussion with Tammy on whether or not that should be included in this particular document, or if it should be included in the vulnerability risk assessments on climate adaptation.
Okay.
But it's a very good point.
Okay.
It might be a case of broadening this action, so it's not just extreme heat, but also extreme heat and poor air quality events.
Thanks.
So coming down the home stretch here, moving into the other category that includes wastewater and food.
No? Thank you.
If I may, thank you.
Of course.
The prepared for extreme heat events is maybe a note to put in here also in the agricultural sector, being that we are such a large agricultural sector, and there may need to be efforts looked into water allotments on how much water farmers are going to be allowed to use. If we keep going into these extreme heat events, we may not have enough in the future. Just something to keep in mind.
Thank you for that comment, Councillor. We also do have another section of the plan where we put lower priority action items. So these are action items that we could move forward with if resources became available. And under the adaptation section there, we do have an action to collaborate with the agricultural sector on adaptation and mitigation. So again, if council felt that that needed to be moved from lower priority to the higher priority, that's something that we could take as feedback for the final draft of the plan, but it is included currently as a lower priority action in the existing plan.
Thank you.
And if I could just add on to that, it's not only the crops that are growing, but the livestock as well that needs the extra water.
Okay, so into that final section there, so just getting back to that page, excuse me. So the first action here is to enhance and promote organics diversion, waste reduction, and recycling. And so this is, again, one of those actions that we're already doing quite a bit of work on the promoting piece. And as council knows, we've started doing some work, some intense work, looking at the enhancement piece. This is, however, pretty grant dependent, and so we're looking for opportunities, as council knows, to get some grant funding and looking in 2020 for some announcements around that. So assuming that we're able to secure grant funding, the enhanced piece of this could be relatively straightforward, and we'll just continue on with the promotion piece that we're already working on. We did, however, we never know about grant funding, so we did put costs as quite high just in case we're unable to secure that. But we know that organics are a major piece of our footprint, and so we've identified that as a high priority action here.
Yeah, and of course there can be provincial support, well, as the district is very well aware, on the cost side of things. So so that might well change. And the effort, if you have to do more grant applications in the future, effort could be high. But again, in terms of the promotion, again, it's how long is a piece of string. You can kind of bite off as much as you want to chew. And conservatively, we have that in red at the moment. But the greenhouse gas impacts can be quite considerable, and the economic impacts can be excellent. So with this particular one, with the economic impacts, is mainly in terms of extending the lifespan of the landfill, and the impacts with respect to that, which of course that's really an excellent impact.
So the next action is around water conservation, which we know is really critical for our community. And here you'll see that we have specifically named the agricultural sector as a target stakeholder for this item, because we know that that's an important piece of their work. And so this is a general action to increase water conservation in the community, continuing on the work that we've already started and enhancing that work through our partners.
Yeah, and efforts, we've put in it as medium. The greenhouse gas impacts will actually be quite low for this action, and the reason is because we're mainly saving electricity consumption, and again, that has such a low greenhouse gas footprint. But electricity can be quite costly, so the economic impacts are quite high. There can be other economic impacts as well, such as potentially, deferring, the construction of new infrastructure, extending the lifespan of existing infrastructure, for example, perhaps the water treatment plant or, other facilities that hold water. So those are some of the benefits of this action. Also, it helps to reduce the vulnerability to climate change as well. So if we have, more uncertainty in terms of our precipitation and when that falls over the year.
So in the interest of time, I'm going to roll the next three up because they all have to do with education and promotion about these types of actions. So they are expanding support for local food production, expanding climate change education, and collaborating with local organizations on climate action initiatives. And again, we're already doing quite a bit of this work, but just giving direction to staff to continue that work and to bring this forward in our work plans moving into the future on an ongoing basis.
And then, well, in terms of all of these as well, are kind of how much do you want to, you can sort of bite off as much as you want to chew. And the greenhouse gas impacts and the economic impacts, really difficult to calculate to the extent that I didn't even try, actually. Just kind of made some assumptions in terms of what kind of impacts they might have. But it's a very difficult thing to try to estimate.
Next is continue expanding our urban tree cover and green spaces and parklands. So again, tying in with our existing Parks and Recreation Master Plan and just giving further priority to this. Also taking into account fire safety and looking at, climate tolerant trees and so on. And this action was one that had very strong support at our public open house. Depending on how much we want to do and the way that we want to move forward with this, the cost could be quite high. However, there may also be grants available, but we can't count on them, so we've put the costs here as high.
Yeah, and effort also we put in as high. Greenhouse gas impacts and economic impacts is, not bad, fairly substantial, and that's mainly as a result of you can see this in your own daily life. If there's a beautiful place to walk, you're much more likely to take that walk, if there's nice trees and shading and that kind of thing, rather than, say, a car park which is baking hot in the Okanagan sun with no shade whatsoever. So that's kind of how those impacts are calculated, but there's lots of co-benefits to this action around kind of enhancing tourism, having a more beautiful community for people to live in, the social benefits, the health benefits, even reducing pollutants in the air, and even mental health benefits as well.
And the final action proposed is to promote Summerland as a green tourism destination and working with TODA and other community partners to do that. And we put this in the sort of the medium term, and we put the costs as medium because, that could take on a few different lives depending on how far we wanted to go with it. So didn't want to be too conservative, but also wanted to be a little bit realistic there.
And also being conservative with the effort, put the effort in as red at the moment, and you can see what the greenhouse gas impacts and economic impacts could be. There may be, maybe some savings there as well. If there is a significant increase in tourism to the community, I didn't take that into account, but if that's of interest, then I could look at that. And also worth mentioning that the utilities used to have a free program for businesses where they would provide free energy assessments. And, so that program has since dried up. There is more money coming through from utilities to support businesses, which is good to know. Exactly what form that takes, I don't know yet. But the utilities could also be an excellent partner going forward on this. Well, FortisBC could be an excellent partner going forward.
Great, so that's 33 actions in 1 hour, so a bit of a whirlwind tour. Lots of work went into developing the plan, and there's still lots of work to go, but we hope that this helps to show Council the direction that we're proposing, and that the plan gives a good overview of the direction that we're seeking to move forward in terms of informing staff's work plans into the next few years. So thanks very much, and we're happy for any questions or comments you have.
Good, thank you very much for your presentation, the three of you, and Corey as well. Any general questions or specific to one item that Council has? Councillor Holmes?
Just a general question for clarification. So this basically replaces the Climate Action Plan. So that's retired once this is done. Yeah.
That's correct.
Councillor Patton? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In regards to the step code provisions here, since we already have Penticton that's implemented, we already have Kelowna that's implemented, perhaps what we look at is when you talk about maybe some reference to the fees, perhaps we look at the step 4 or 5 where we're going into more net zero. Since step 3 is already going to be 2022, realistically, the builders that we're dealing with in Summerland are already going to be dealing with the step code in the lower steps, 1, 2, and 3. So perhaps the rebates that we look at are into the higher steps, which would be more incentive because of the cost for construction and that's going to relate to. And thank you.
Good thought.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anyone else? Councillor Van Elfen?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a comment about the proposed charging stations. We know that grant's going to come through, so we hope. I think we need to keep in mind, and I know we've had comments about it before, but the Public Works Yard, specifically, possible charging stations there if we ever start to change over our fleet. It may be somewhere we could use them.
So thanks for that question, comment. Two items to note for council. So this is the community plan. We still have the corporate plan to come, which will talk more about our corporate fleet. However, council will note in the proposed 2020 budget that we have asked for funding to support the installation of 2 charging stations at the Public Works yard in anticipation of electrifying some of the fleet vehicles. And that's partially because there's currently a rebate program that's quite attractive that would make that installation much more affordable if we did it this year than in the future. So council will look forward to more information on that through the budget process.
Okay. Anyone else? Thank you, staff, for continuing to look for other funding options. It's fantastic. Okay, so we have a recommendation in front of us. Is there anyone that would like to bring that forward in the form of a motion?
Well, just a question, first of all. So what's the next step with, this is still, I mean, if it's still a draft, when does it not become a draft?
So it's our intention to take away the comments from council today and to add them in with the results that I mentioned from the open house and the comments that we've received from Simon Fraser, and to bring back a final draft for adoption consideration, hopefully realistically in sort of mid to late February.
Okay.
Okay. So,
Well,
Councillor
I'll move to accept it for information.
thank you. Seconded by Councillor Patton. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Great, thank you. Thank you very much. It was a great presentation. Okay, on to 5.2, pickleball/tennis/dogs in park final report. And our manager of recreation, Lori Mullen, and our consultant, Leslie Dick, are here to speak to that.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good afternoon, Council. The purpose of this report is for Council to receive the final report on the pickleball, tennis, and dogs in parks project. Leslie Dyke, a local consultant, was engaged to review and provide recommendations about how best to further develop and implement outdoor playing courts and supports related to pickleball and tennis, as well as off-leash areas and bylaws related to dogs. The consultant has now completed her research, consultation process, community engagement, and costing analysis, and Leslie is here today to present her final report.
Great, thanks. Thanks very much. So, really pleased to be here to have all of this information pulled together. A couple of things. My summary or my high-level report will be high-level, given that Council's already provided a lot of time on this report. So I won't go into all the details as per the lengthy discussion we had with Council in December. So I just will ask you if you have questions to bring forward from there. Just know that I won't address them at a high level in the overall summary. I'll save that for questions. Sure. And the other thing is I want to start by just expressing my appreciation to Council for taking on these. They were recommended in the Parks and Recreation Master Plan as things that need to be addressed and brought forward as important needs in our community. So it's really, as a local Summerlander, I'm really appreciative that these are coming to the attention of Council. So I really want to express appreciation there. I also want to express appreciation to all of the stakeholders and citizens of Summerland, everyone that I spoke to get information, to explore things in more detail. Some people that I went back to multiple times were always willing and interested and engaged, so I want to express my appreciation. So what I'm going to talk about today then at a really high level, just a little bit on purpose and principles to remind you of those, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the activities that we undertook in order to put this report together, and then spend most of the time talking about recommendations, and briefly at the end then we can have some additional questions.
Excuse me, Leslie, did you want all of the questions at the end, or specific questions to a matter that you're speaking on as you're going through it?
I'm
What's your
open to
preference?
either. It's usually better in my mind if you can pause as we go, but it depends on your time. If you're feeling pressed for time, it's better to save it probably to the end. So up to Madam Mayor.
All right. Carry on, thank you.
All right, so from the purpose of the report perspective, the purpose was to identify the needs and requirements according to those 3 issues that were identified in the Parks and Recreation master planning process, to consider possible community partnerships and operational models, to summarize the background information and research, including feedback from stakeholders and general public, to provide land use recommendations and estimated costs, including phasing, and to provide some bylaw and policy recommendations. So we'll be speaking about all of those things as I go through the recommendations. But one thing to point out is the purpose of this report was not a decision-making report. It was not to suggest that this is the decision that needs to be made, because in many cases, the decisions are going to be based on priorities at the community level. So that's really the council's responsibility. So my goal was to pull everything into one place to make that as much support as possible to that process. So the planning principles that were applied, these planning principles were developed in combination with consultation with staff, as well as the Parks and Recreation Committee, and we also got feedback from council. And the planning principles were very much related to being as efficient, effective, and ensure that whatever is proposed is aligning with what is already in place. So it's aligning with existing plans and making sure they're compatible with adjacent land use and amenities. So one of the principles was not to have a significant negative impact on any of the current Parks and Recreation uses. Meet local needs and current demand, as well as anticipate future demand. Look at ways to be affordable, to build, maintain, and consider phased approaches. And I'll be talking a little bit more about phased approaches, because the phased approaches in the report were kept very high level, but there are some more specific things that council may want to continue that I'll touch on. Accessible and high quality is very important, I believe, including walking distance to high-density residential areas if possible. Considering of social and health and recreation benefits, and considering of environmental, economic, and tourism benefits. So all of those things feed in, which is why, in addition to recommendations for where to place certain facilities, there's also some longer-term recommendations in there to support future planning. So the activities that I undertook, in a nutshell, a document review, which included the relevant plans, bylaws, etc., as well as reports from stakeholders. I also reviewed all of the district-owned property, because of course it's more affordable to be able to use land that's already owned by the district. I looked at background research and best practices. I looked at regional approaches, what's been done in other communities. I looked at local use data. I talked to Public Works, because of course any changes will impact their work and their workload, and visited sites, of course. I interviewed stakeholder organizations, as well as stakeholder individuals, all noted in the report. I met with the Summerland Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee twice. One to get some high-level direction, which is what was taken to the public consultation, and then again with some more detailed, with some more concrete recommendations. As I mentioned, we did have an open house in November, and then we presented to council for a lengthy discussion in December. So the recommendations. I'm going to start with recommendations for dogs in parks, and I've left, you'll notice the numbers of the recommendations, there's a mistake. It goes from 1.5 to 1.7. 1.6 is missing. It's not the imaginary recommendation. There is, the numbering was wrong. So it's wrong in the report, and I left it wrong here so that you could directly see, but my suggestion is that we fix that. So we will.
Silver bullet.
Yeah, the silver bullet. Yeah, this is going to solve all the problems. So there's actually 8 recommendations. They're just misnumbered. So the recommendations, and I'll go through them in detail in a moment with some images, but they're really related to the existing dog beach at Peach Orchard, the recommendation of creating a dog park, and it's just called dog park to differentiate it from dog beach, also in the Peach Orchard area. Recommendation of looking at developing a off-leash dog park at Julia Street Community Church area. And then recommendations around revising bylaws, and there's 2 different bylaws that are recommended to be revised. Then the other recommendations here are really more related to implementation. So it's promoting, developing a strategy to promote and support enforcement. So probably some kind of a campaign once the decision's been made to revise the bylaws. Development of tourism data collection plan, and that's to support longer-term planning, because there are some recommendations, as you'll see, around considering to integrate dog park information into planning for Memorial Park, as well as into planning for Orchard Park, into planning for the rodeo, Summerland Rodeo grounds as well. There's a recommendation on improving dog licensing and tracking. As you'll see in the report, we estimate there's over 2,000 dogs in Summerland, yet our licensing indicates about 1,000. So we know that there is some room for improvement there. And then the final recommendation is setting aside a specific dedicated process and time to review feedback to the bylaws and revise as necessary within 2 years. It may be that things will shift and change, but it's going to be very important to make sure that everything is working. So that's the recommendations in a nutshell. So let me just start with the bylaws. The first bylaw that I want to refer to is the one that we're recommending the most changes to, and that's the Parks bylaw, bylaw 95013. And the section that we're recommending be changed is the section that talks about animals in parks. And you can see that I've put up the original language there, but what we're recommending is that the language that refers to Peach Orchard Park being off-leash between October and May be removed, and instead these 3 points be made in the bylaws. The first one speaks about all year on-leash dogs in the community, and this is really about making sure that where people are enjoying and recreating in a safe way, dogs are allowed to be on leash. And so that's why we've named all of the parks, and we've also indicated that the exceptions to this, of course, are actually on sports fields and on beaches or near playgrounds or spray parks, because those are not, in our minds, compatible with dogs. So there have been listing Memorial, Dale Meadows, Living Memorial, which is Snow Avenue Ballpark, Peach Orchard Beach Park, Powell Beach Park, Peach Orchard Campground, Giants Head Park, Conkle Mountain Park, and Summerland Rodeo Grounds. The second point is related to all year off-leash dogs, and this relates to what I'm going to speak about next, and that's designated areas that are fenced and designed specifically to be welcoming and supportive and inclusive of people and their dogs. And because that may shift and change over time, and because those don't exist yet, the language recommended at this point is just to say designated district of Summerland off-leash parks only. So that's why that language has been simplified. And then the final point is around off-season off-leash dogs, and that is in order to make our community as dog-friendly as possible, but at the same time to protect busy areas when there's significant numbers using our facilities, as in the summertime, as well as to protect wildlife and natural habitat, because of course summer is very essential for many of the species that live in our different park areas. So having off-leash as something that's in the more dormant period, the winter period, is part of that. And so that recommendation for off-leash, off-season off-leash dogs is related to that. And the areas that we're recommending for that are Powell Beach Park, Conkle Mountain Park, Summerland Rodeo Grounds, and Giants Head Park. Now, the Giants Head Park has a caveat when the road is closed for the season, because it's not quite the same as October 1st to May 1st, so that would need to be something that would be considered. And the second bylaw
Yep. Question from Councillor Traynor?
Sure.
I'm allowed to ask a question now?
Yeah, I left that to
Okay, I'll
the
make it
mayor.
really quick. If you can just go back to the previous
Sure.
slide. Off-leash, off-season, off-leash, Giant's Head Park, there was some discussion about that at the Parks and Rec committee. I think you were going to ask an environmentalist or about
we did.
sensitive areas.
Yeah, so with Lori's assistance, we went to speak to 3 different people who work in the area of environment and they're not specifically knowledgeable of dogs per se, but they're knowledgeable about natural environments. And we had a variety of perspectives on that. And from the natural wildlife management perspective, it sounded like, of course, what is ideal for natural wildlife is no dogs, ever, at all. That is what's best for wildlife. But that it's reasonable to create a compromise, and that a compromise can range everything from only allowing dogs on leash all the time to having certain periods that are less impactful, like in winter periods, to allow dogs to be off leash. But those are always compromise situations. So we would need to use our best judgment around what we think would be reasonable. What we did hear from the consultants was that on Giant's Head, it would probably be reasonable to have, from a wildlife protection and environmental protection perspective, to have off-leash in the winter months. Now, that's a completely different question than the impact on the usage and the people and some of those kinds of questions, which is another question around whether it's appropriate to have off-leash in the winter months. But that's the other side of it. So those 2 things have to be weighed.
Okay.
Yeah. So one of the things you'll notice in the report, I made a recommendation that it be closely monitored. And so I think that any kind of campaign that's developed should also include very clear, we want your feedback, and here's how you can give us your feedback, and we need to hear from you. And really make sure that that's available and out there so that people, as they're using that space, know that the feedback is wanted, and when they see things, that they basically report it to the district as part of the strategy. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So the other bylaw recommendation is a very simple one, and it's related to the responsible dog owner bylaw, and that's just to remove school grounds and instead add spray parks and skate parks. And that's to be specific around spray parks and skate parks, because since we have them in our community, but also because school grounds are not the jurisdiction of the district. So as I move into talking about the actual recommended locations, just to say that a strategy that creates an inclusive community for dogs and their owners needs to have many different dimensions to it. It needs to include the off-leash aspects to it. It needs to include the built environment, services like waste stations and bags and those kinds of things, attitudes towards dogs. It needs to include, as I said, the licensing pieces so that we understand and know who and what kind of supports are necessary, so we understand and that people can give feedback. And then it also includes having places for people to go that are wild areas as well as places that are very protected. And so the proposal here around the dog beach and dog park at Peach Orchard are really specifically related to those areas that are fenced and closely protected and are a certain part of an overall approach in a community to supporting dogs and dog owners. So the first option recommendation is to basically enhance what already exists, that's the dog beach, and to make it wheelchair accessible. The costs that are estimated for that are fairly minimal because they involve asphalt, not concrete. So as you know, asphalt is much less expensive than concrete. It would then allow a way for people with mobility aids to be able to get through a gate and into the area and be in there on a pad while their dog is off leash. So that's the first recommendation. You'll notice, so in the report I made cost estimates for the capital costs. That's development of the recommendation, as well as the annual costs, which are the maintenance costs. And the maintenance costs are up there, but just to note, and it wasn't as clear in the actual report, but those are already operating expenses. We already have garbage cans there, and they're already being cleaned and taken away. So those costs that are there are just so that you know what it costs to have a garbage can and have it maintained in that location. The capital cost includes the addition of the more, how did the public works staff put it? The more esoteric garbage cans, which are a little bit prettier and are on a pad, and it sounds like that's the direction that our community is moving in terms of having attractive facilities. So that was included in that cost, yeah.
I'm just wondering if the capital costs also includes some opportunity for shade for people that are using the mobility aids when they're on their pad?
No, that's not been included. And in fact, for each one of the suggestions, I've either made a note that trees are available, like in the areas which would be probably providing enough shade, or I've made a note that shade needs to be considered. The cost of figuring out shade will really depend on the design. And so it could be everything from a couple $1,000s to $15,000 or $20,000. So if it just was identified as something needs to be considered, but it wasn't costed because the cost range I didn't feel would be helpful.
Okay.
Because it'd be such a wide range. Yeah.
Okay. I guess if the pathway goes to the existing shaded areas, then it's not.
So it goes to the
That
current
would be a
bench.
design thing? Oh, I see,
Yeah.
okay.
So if you're
Okay.
familiar with that area, you can't really
Yes.
see it in the photo, but there's a bench, and so it would go in and it would include the bench.
Okay.
Yeah. So that bench currently does not have its own shade.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Barkwell?
Yeah, I was wondering, I wouldn't have a clue how big the pad, for the handicapped access should be. I know that the handicapped access has been on the, identified as something we need to provide for a long time. I'm glad to see it's finally here. I think it came up early in my first term. But yeah, how do you decide, did you have any consultations on the size of the pad and the length of the?
Yes, so the sizing of the sidewalk to come in terms of length and width, we actually assessed it for slope, because that was our first concern, but there are no slope issues there. So it was just around the distance and the width. So the width is designed to follow what are the guidelines for access, in fact, a little bit wider in order to, and then the gate, the proposed width of the gate that's also in the report follows those guidelines as well. And then when you go in and create a turning radius, we've done the same thing. So we've created actually a little bit larger than what the minimum would be required, just based on the fit with the space. Yeah. So it's actually beyond what the minimum expectations would be.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right, so can I move on? Yes, to the dog park. So one of the things that is really needed in Summerland is a safe, fenced, off-leash area that leaves enough room for small and large dogs to run, that is designed to keep dogs' stress to a minimum, hence things like double gates and those kinds of things. So all of that is documented in the report. And to find a space that's big enough to do this, ideally at about a 1 acre size, that's where the reviewing of all the different properties in Summerland was considered. The one that's being recommended is Peach Orchard Beach Park, in part because there's sufficient space, in part because it's an easily accessed space in our community. And while it will interfere somewhat with events in that area, it won't have a significant impact, as in it can be worked around. Other events can work around that design. So that's why this is being recommended. From a costing perspective, the actual shape of it was just mapped out as approximately 1 acre rectangle shape. One of the principles of well-designed dog parks, however, is to have something that has an irregular shape. So that might be something to think about with respect to design in the future, to think about what would this actually look like in terms of shape that would look attractive and fit into this area. But for costing purposes, I worked with a rectangle shape so that we could have some starting place for this. So this 1 acre would be divided between large and small, and again, divided between large and small dogs because that is best practice around minimizing stress and anxiety for dogs. It's also designed with respect to the divider so that it can also be considered how you might want to implement. And here's why I want to make a few comments around phasing. So when you look at the report, you'll see there's also a ½ acre version that runs more rectangularly right along the road. And that version is smaller, and it's a slightly different shape, and it makes it so that it's not as conducive to being able to be divided into 2 spaces. However, from a phasing perspective, it might be that council wants to consider something between the ½ acre and the acre, and something between a rectangle that's long and narrow and more square. There's a lot of different approaches you could take, or it could be that you start with something that has space for all dogs, and then you work into the plan, creating additional space for small and large dogs, something like that. So from a phasing perspective, there's many options, and it depends on the priorities in terms of timing and where your resources, if there's opportunities to get grant funds, for example. So that's why, from a phasing perspective, I left it very simple. I just proposed that this be the starting point, and I proposed the costing for this, so that you'd have a place to begin your deliberations.
Excuse me, I have Councillor Holmes and now Councillor Traynor, please.
Yeah, thank you. You kind of answered my question, but we could just decide we're prepared to say, for example, to set aside 1 acre down there, and then staff could work with the Dog Owners Association and whoever to figure out what that what that 1 acre ought to look like, because 1 acre's kind of 1 acre, and we as council probably don't know what's best for the dogs. So that's completely feasible, I guess, right? That's what I'm saying. So we wouldn't really be deciding the configuration of the park. We would just be deciding generally this is we could decide this is where we want to put it.
Yeah, because this drawing that was the basis for the costing, it's not a design. And I think the design lens needs to be applied to this.
Yeah.
So that's exactly it, and a phased lens. So if it was developed to be smaller, and then space was left to be able to add on, so that you could have then divided small and large dogs, if it was important to get something done quickly, that could be an approach that you could take. Yeah.
Just to follow up, but I don't quite understand the point of phasing. Why don't you just do the full thing up together?
That's a council decision. Yeah, the phasing is doable, but that's a council decision.
Okay, Councillor Traynor and then Councillor Barkwell.
Another point that was brought up about this location was potential water issues. Is that factored into the budget, and what are the water issues again, if you could remind us?
So I chatted with Public Works a couple times about this, and it sounds like that water is going to be an issue in an ongoing way, and that it's not such a big problem that there is any kind of major, there's no plan for major water work monitoring strategies down there. Now, having said that, the plan for the waterfront has not been developed yet, right? So that waterfront planning process, I believe, is going to have to look at those kinds of issues. So my big question for Public Works is, well, is there anything simply that can be done around those water issues, and how long do the water issues last? And the information that I got back was, well, it's in the spring, and it's pretty much every spring, and it depends on the spring, and it will probably be like a 4 to 6 week period. So the idea then with having a full acre is that when there's parts of that space that are not usable, they won't be used because the existing space is large enough that that wet area, for example, wouldn't be used. I think that part of what's going to be learned as it gets implemented is where the high use areas are and if the grass can withstand it. So there's going to be water questions, but there's also going to be use questions, and whether or not some of the areas will need to then have bark mulch installed or sand or things like that. Like, there's ways to use natural products to create really kind of a natural area that is so that it's not just all manicured grass, because the chances of the grass, if it's really well used, like I think it probably will be, the chances of the grass being able to be maintained is probably, and the whole area is probably not high. Yeah, so I don't know if you answered your questions, because Public Works couldn't be that specific
Yeah, I
for
guess
me
my
as
question
well.
was, is there a way to address the water issue, and what would the cost be?
Yeah, and it doesn't sound like there is a simple answer to address the water issue, so, yeah. The other thing around water to mention down there is the cost for bringing in water inside the gate, and a water stand was built into the cost, and it's not expensive, but the thing to note is that's not potable water. So from a park perspective, it'll be very important that that water is designed in such a way that people know that it's only for pets, it's not for people. So that's another water question down there.
Councillor Barkwell?
Yeah, that was my concern as well, as I wondered whether the water problem was from high lake levels, or is it from drainage, or in the snow melt time, or is it?
Public Works couldn't be specific to me.
And how much water, how much would you have to raise the level of the land, do we know?
No, and I think that's one of those, well, literally $10,000 questions. I think that's when you need your experts in that to come in and look at that whole park area and provide advice as to that. So when we start talking about the tennis area and the pickleball areas, we're going to be talking about water again. Water is a never-ending challenge, and that's why $10,000 is recommended to set aside for that analysis. So if that was something that council wanted to do, then I would suggest you would need to actually have someone who's knowledgeable in that area do the tests. Yeah.
And also I'd add that I was like Councillor Holmes, I was sort of thinking, well, this is not a small project, it's not the sort of project that you'd want to phase. If we want to put up fencing down there, I think council should just do it. The other part of it is if there's a water problem, it makes it unusable for everything, so we're going to have to bite the bullet and deal with that too. If we want to make it, if we got it there and we want to use it in some way, let's do it.
Okay, let's carry on.
Okay. The other recommendation is Julia Street Community Church. The area is a grass area, although it's not irrigated, which is why the recommendation is bark mulch. And it really comes from the fact that this area, which is about a third of an acre, which is it's a city lot, the church would really like to see it used, and they'd like to enter into a medium-term agreement, so something like 15-year agreement. However, there would be cost to using it, and of course, fundamentally, there would need to be consultation with the neighbors. Whatever was put there would need some privacy, fencing, things like that, to address privacy. And the reason that the cost is estimated to be so high, we were very conservative in the estimation, is because if there's going to be water brought inside the fenced area, it would either need to come from a city supply, or would need to be brought over from the church under the parking lot. And Public Works didn't want to estimate that until they could actually get in there and look. But the general thought was, well, if it requires cutting asphalt and digging and putting in pipes and bringing it over, it's going to be $20,000. So when you're looking at this, $60,000, $20,000 of that, just for to remind you, is for that particular aspect of it. So it's very close to town, and the church is a really committed partner to supporting the quality of life in the community. So from a partnership perspective, there's some real opportunities there. However, it's not without its challenges. Any questions on this one? Okay. All right, so the recommendations around tennis and pickleball, there were three major recommendations. The first one was related to Peach Orchard Campground, and that was to change the multi-use space into dedicated pickleball space, which would create 6 pickleball courts. And the recommendation was to install a sport grid tile system, which I'll explain when I get to that section. The other recommendation was to explore a partnership with Lakeshore Racket Center, the Summerland Recreation Society, and to explore a partnership with them to put 2 tennis courts on their space. They had already, in their original planning, wanted to have a 4th court beside the 3 that are already there, and then there would be space for a 4th court. So the idea is to explore a partnership there, to do an assessment of that site, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And then the third recommendation is around Powell Beach, and this recommendation is to continue to use and maintain until the results from an assessment, a geotechnical assessment, are available, and the district is ready to make longer-term plans. It's the kind of decision that's going to require a lot of different input and need to fit into the larger plan. So there's nothing specific that's recommended there.
I just need to interrupt for a moment, Leslie.
Yeah.
My apologies. I'm just wondering, Lori, if you have received the information from our corporate officer, and it has to do with the comments that we had at the beginning of this meeting when neither of you were available here. I just want to make sure that you have received those. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So from the pickleball perspective, the recommendation is to use the campground space, and the reason that the grid is recommended is, again, water issues. It's never ending. You'd think we live in a desert, it's a little bit surprising, but water issues are everywhere. So the issue here is the consultant, Tomco, who are kind of the main provider of tennis court building, they are very familiar with our space, and they've done a lot of work already with surfacing and resurfacing. They suggested that there may not be a vapor barrier built into the concrete, and this could be part of what the issue is. And so when I suggested that we just, resurface and change the former multi-use into 4, there was some concerns around how many times you could do that before you'd need to strip everything off again and resurface, just because of moisture. And then, of course, there's a seam between what used to be 2 separate tennis courts, and whether or not the quality of what could be repaired would be sufficient, that the players would be happy with the result. Without actually coming to look at it, the suggestion was it's a bit iffy, and it may be a better alternative to put down a grid. And this grid it's got an 8-year guarantee. It's likely to last for 20 years. It needs cleaning underneath it every couple of years. But it sounds like it's being used to good effect in many places. So that was why that recommendation. However, it's expensive. So that's why I left the second option in there, and that option is basically to redo the surface, and just know that every, let's say, 5 years or so, and that's why the maintenance costs are so much higher in option 2, is because I amortized the resurfacing over 5 years. So that amortized annual cost is built into what I call the maintenance cost, because you need to save up the money in order to be able to resurface it again. So that, just to help council with decision-making, is kind of the high level there. Now, of course, from a timing perspective, if council wanted to do something quickly, the option 2 is, of course, the faster option, because it's less expensive and it could be done right away. Just the cautions are, it won't last, and there'll be additional expenses with the resurfacing and whether the seam can be repaired sufficiently. So that's kind of the trade-off there.
I just have a quick question for clarification. The annual maintenance of option 2, that's 7450 times 5? You've
Yes. so
amortized over
that's-
5 years?
Exactly. So that's every 5 years, and then by the end of that 5 years, you'd be ready to resurface, and that money would be available.
So I guess it comes in a little bit higher really than option 1, except that you're having to put the upfront costs out.
Yeah,
on
that's
option 1.
exactly it.
Okay.
Now, having said that, option 1, you do have to maintain that grid.
Yes.
And so, for example, you need to make sure that the pine needle situation is not a problem. Because if it is a problem, and it needs the experts to look at the situation, then it might need to be cleaned more often or that kind of thing. So it could add a little bit of cost to it.
And that would be outside of the $450 maintenance, are you thinking? For the option 1?
For option 1, it's $450, and it would be outside of that if you had to do it annually. But it sounds like probably it's every 2 years. It would have to come up, be cleaned, and then put back down.
Okay. And Councillor Holmes has a question as well.
Yeah, thank you. Just so I'm clear in my mind, these sports grid tiles, they're that kind of a really hard plastic thing that they kind of snap together, and they come in so if one tile wears out, you can replace it.
Yeah, theoretically, although I don't think they like to. I think you can take it out and replace it, but there are some concern. It's not always as simple as it sounds, I guess, is.
So they have, I know they have those in Revelstoke. I've played.
Have you played on it?
I've played on it, yeah. It's not the greatest playing experience.
Well, and this is another one of these, you get what you pay for. If you wanted to spend twice that, you can get what they would call a competition grade, but it would double the cost.
They tend to put them on courts that are beyond hope.
Beyond hope.
Yeah, I always thought the high school might be a good place to put it.
Yeah. So, any other questions around the pickleball suggestion?
Carry on.
Okay, so from the tennis, as I alluded to, the proposal is to build 2 new courts, and rather than incur the cost of ripping out Powell and then rebuilding on that spot, which would be guaranteed to be more expensive, it would make sense to, if you're going to build new courts, start from a clean space. And because the Lakeshore Racquet Center is an interested and willing partner, and because they're not-for-profit, it opens up some opportunities for pursuing additional funding opportunities, and it also creates an environment where you've got multiple courts in one spot, which is very conducive to tournaments and things like that. It seemed like an option that should be explored. Of course, building 2 new tennis courts is not an inexpensive thing, which is why, capital costs are high. But it's something that also could be phased. It's the kind of thing that one court could be built and then a second court could be built. So that would be something that would need to be determined. From a timing perspective, you'll see in my report that I've recommended it as being actually the 2 of them being built in year 3. But this gets back to the idea of it depends on the priorities of council. If the geotech assessment is really positive, and if the monies can be found to build one, it could be that you build one sooner and you build a second one after that. My only, and again, it's in the report, but I personally feel really strongly that whatever the plan is for the waterfront, it include thinking about that property. So yes, that property is not the property of the district, but the Lakeshore Racquet Center has communicated to me that they'd like to see the space to be well used and to the benefit of citizens. So I think that it would be very important to consider that space in whatever planning process is pursued. From an annual maintenance perspective, I did not estimate annual maintenance. That would be outside again, it could be a lot, it could be a little. It wouldn't be helpful for your decision, I didn't feel. So that's the recommendation for the tennis. So I'll just stop there. Is there any questions there?
Yes.
Is the geotechnical review, would that be for 2 courts or just 1? And if it's, would it be, I guess, different costs for, I presume the 1 court right in the parking lot would be a lot easier and straightforward than locating a 2nd court, and since there's 3 courts right there already, you would think that geotechnical review wouldn't be that complicated. Or is that just an assumption?
Yeah, so I visited that question with Parks and with the Public Works, and I'm also recommending for that same 10,000. It sounds like now it's not the skill set that we would have in house. We'd have to go out of house to get it, but for that 10,000, it's likely that we could get an estimate of both of those spaces, as well as get an estimate of what the water issues are at Powell. So the recommendation is to actually contract a geotech assessment and be thorough in assessing that the lakeshore space as well as assessing Powell. It sounds like it would probably benefit from assessing Peach Orchard as well. So I don't know whether the district would actually want to add a little bit of resourcing to it and think about that as something that can be done in advance of the waterfront planning that needs to happen. It sounds like there's a bunch of assessment that could be helpful there. Okay. And then finally, the long-term planning. So Memorial Park Master Planning is coming up. Summerland Rodeo Grounds Master Planning is coming up. Waterfront Master Planning is coming up. School District is in the process of figuring out what they're going to do with their gym, and that's going to also then impact the existing tennis courts. So, and then the last one related to indoor recreation space, of course, Summerland is looking at building a wellness center and looking at what kind of our infrastructure, how that could shift and change. So all of those things have implications for courts. Certainly for outdoor courts, so Memorial and the rodeo grounds and waterfront, and school district, and then indoor space as part of the facility planning for the district. Just a couple comments on the master planning. So Memorial Park, because it is so central and it is so protected, the pickleball club actually did recommend as one of their priority spots that they'd really like to see. And of course, though, it's also very central for local Summerlanders taking their dogs out, especially with the new development that's being built in that area, which is a dog-friendly building. So there's going to be a lot of the use of that park needs to consider dogs and pickleball for sure, but there's going to be a lot of demand on a small amount of space. So I think that's very important to keep in mind when thinking about long-term planning, and the more pressure that can be taken off of Memorial Park planning, the better in my mind. So I would really highly recommend that as something that that council think about. The rodeo grounds, the same thing. What the demands will be if there's high quality pickleball already in place and high quality off-leash dog areas already in place, then that will impact how that planning goes forward. So any decisions that council makes will obviously impact those, although I really do recommend that the idea of a destination off-leash park, one that's large, and that was one of the comments I believe that came recently to the district, was about having really large. Someone recommended a 6-acre, or they'd like to see a 6-acre off-leash area, for example. The waterfront master planning, of course, I think I've already commented on that, and the fact that it's to the benefit of everyone that the waterfront be as seamless as possible. The other thing that I would mention there is that right now the Lakeshore Rackets Club is overflow parking for Rotary. So there's nothing that doesn't overlap with anything else, I guess is what I'm saying. And then school district, those tennis courts really do need to be redeveloped. I would imagine that as they're thinking about what to do with it, they're going to think about actually taking them right out and redoing if they want to keep them. And just knowing that pickleball is a growing sport in phys ed classes because of the focus on lifelong physical activity, I would think that there would be some interest in courts that would not be just tennis, but possibly pickleball as well. So there are opportunities for those kinds of things in the future. So I would just remind council about that as well as you're making your decisions. So I think that takes me to the end. And that's just the capital cost summary. And the thing that I would, and that's not the operating, that's not the maintenance cost year to year, that's the capital cost. I've tried to be conservative, so there's places that money could be saved. One of the things I wanted to mention was in relation to Living Memorial, the Snow Avenue Ballpark. So that was the preferred location of the Summerland Dog Owners Association for an off-leash area. Because, of course, there are no water issues, it's very accessible, and there's already a lot of fencing there. So it, of course, would be the least expensive spot to actually adapt to create a really high-quality off-leash area. But as per the principles that we brought to this planning, as per discussions previously with council and the Parks and Recreation Committee, it would take away from another recreation use. So that was why it's not being proposed. But from a cost perspective, of course, much less expensive. So that's something that you would need to be aware of. The other thing that I would mention, is that basically grants and other in-kind supports have not been factored in. And that's actually one of the reasons why, in addition to the fact that, for example, shade areas, you could make them very inexpensive, you can make them very expensive. I left those off of the costing because those are a perfect opportunity to do things like fundraising, to work with the community, to raise monies for benches, to raise money for shade areas, to do, for planting, in areas where it's irrigated, that kind of thing. So that's something that else I would mention in regard to the capital costs. And finally, the phasing. The phasing is also very conservative, which is why it's spread over three phases, 3 years. But that's a real decision for council. If the priorities are to do things quickly, then there may need to be compromises made, and there may need to be phased approaches and less money spent up front and more money spent later. Those are all decisions that council will need to make. But hopefully the information that's contained in this report provides what you need in order to be able to make those decisions. So I think that's it from me.
Yeah, just one question. So you mentioned, I guess, a couple. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Thank you.
You mentioned a couple times that that you didn't want to negatively impact existing uses of other. Although at Pete Georgia Campground, that's negatively impacting tennis by removing a tennis court.
Yes, it is. Yep.
So
Yep.
the principal, I guess that's something for council to decide.
Yep.
That is one of the recommendations, is to negatively impact one of an existing use.
Yep, that's exactly it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other questions of Leslie or Lori while they're here? Well, I guess Lori's here for a bit still. All right, could I have someone bring forward the recommendation? Councillor.
As presented, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. So it's received for information. Seconder, Councillor Traynor. Any further discussion? Councillor Holmes.
Again, I guess, where does this go from here? When do we actually make a decision on all this?
Through Madam Mayor, these projects will come forward as part of the capital 2020 budget deliberations, which I believe is on Thursday.
Okay. Thank you. No further discussion or questions? All in favor? And none opposed. Thank you. Summerland Health and Wellness, I guess it's Summerland Community Health and Wellness Center, and this is on to Lori. Oh, a short break? We will be taking a short recess.